Welcome back again, everybody. We have one more letter to look at in this section of the course. So let's jump right in here. You are having a graduation party next Saturday night. You have invited 50 people to celebrate at an outdoor barbecue evening, which may continue into late into the night. Write a letter to your elderly neighbour. And in your letter, explain what will be happening, offer your apologies in advance, and invite him or her to join the celebration. So like previously, there are quite a few different elements to this task. In order to make sure that we acknowledge each and every one of them, let's go through the usual process of highlighting the key words. So what have we got here? We are having a graduation party. It's quite important that we acknowledge the reason for the party, to do with the graduation. And it's on next Saturday night. That's all quite important as well. We'll have to make sure we include that information. So there are going to be 50 people there. We've invited 50 people. And these are all important here, these adjectives. It's outdoors, and it's a barbecue. It's in the evening. So we have outdoor barbecue evening, and it may continue into late into the night. Won't definitely, but it may. You can sort of choose your level of likelihood here. You might say that it's likely to go into late into the night, but it's not certain. But it may continue into late into the night. Who are we writing a letter to? We are writing a letter to our elderly neighbour, and this is quite important. The type of neighbour here is important. And to the elderly neighbour, we're going to explain what will be happening. I mean, that's pretty much all together. We need all of that. We're going to offer apologies in advance. We need to apologise. And we need to invite him or her to join the celebration. So that covers the key words, I think. So one of the most important aspects of this task here is the recipient. And the recipient in this case is a neighbour, an elderly neighbour. And what do you think? If you see those words together, what style of writing would you adopt? What tone would you adopt for your letter? We have informal, semi-formal, formal. Now if it were just a neighbour, maybe a next door neighbour, that might indicate that we have cordial relations with them, that we're quite casual with them. If they're a new neighbour, we may be a little bit less casual. We may need to go a little bit more on the formal side. In this case, they're a neighbour. Maybe we've had them for a while, but they're elderly. And just the fact that it's an elderly neighbour should indicate that we need to write in a slightly more formal tone than usual with a neighbour. We need to be a little bit more polite, a little bit more old-fashioned, a little bit more courteous. And as a result, I think it's right that we adopt a semi-formal tone rather than an informal tone. And so this will be an informal letter. And what is going to be the general... this will be a semi-formal letter. And what sort of purpose do you think is the purpose of this letter? A couple of things are happening really here. It doesn't seem to have a central focus. It's more of like a making someone aware. There is an apology in here and an invitation. So it's difficult to have a clear purpose, one central purpose for this. On the whole, though, I see it as sort of an apology and invite letter. But because it doesn't have that one clear thread running throughout it, the first sentence that we're going to write, and because it's a semi-formal letter as well to a neighbour, is likely going to be a sort of, I hope everything is well with you, I hope you're doing well, that kind of sentence. And then we'll just move into the individual bullet point paragraphs. So let's set those up here. P2, P3 and P4. So in P2 we're looking at explaining what will be happening, and we want to return to the highlighted parts here. Make sure we cover all of that there. I mean, we don't really even need to write that many points. for P2 because we're given a lot of information that we're going to include anyway. Let's just remind ourselves of the key parts here. So it's Saturday night, next Saturday night. Let's barbecue. And it's a celebration for a graduation, and there are 50 guests. You arguably don't even need to write all of this down. The important thing probably here will be your ability to paraphrase, because really you're given all of the information already. You don't really have to come up with too many ideas. Now in the second or the third paragraph, we're going to offer our apologies in advance. This is where we want to come up with a little bit more information, a few more ideas, use our imagination, because we can't just say sorry in advance and move on to the next paragraph. So we might say, why are we apologizing really? Well, it's because neighbors, particularly elderly neighbors, are going to value their peace and quiet. So we're going to use that nice expression here. We might have a neighbor who likes her peace and quiet. What are we going to do to try and prevent the party from being too loud? We know it's outdoors, so that's a problem. So maybe we can just talk about that we will warn the guests about the noise that they might make, and we'll make them aware that we have neighbors and we don't want to disturb the neighbors. So what we're going to say about it. So just a couple of points there. And then in the fourth paragraph, we're going to invite the elderly neighbor to join the celebration. And this is a tricky one because I feel if 50 people celebrating a graduation, it's mostly going to be young people there. It's probably unlikely that the elderly neighbor is actually going to want to come to the party, but it's courteous for us to invite them anyway. So the way that we word the invitation is important. I'm just going to say that they would be very welcome. And it's true, they would be very welcome. It's not like we're saying it just out of courtesy, but to say, would you like to come to the party? You can write that, but we know we're very likely to get a negative response to it, as in a no, and it just puts the neighbour in maybe a slightly more awkward position. But maybe that's just my Britishness talking there. So we have that point. Besides that, again, just to reduce that level of awkwardness, we can maybe mention the fact that it's okay to say no. We would understand if they said no. So I'm just going to put a very simple okay to say no, but of course I'll turn that into a much nicer sentence later. But again, we want to re-emphasize the point that it would be great to see them as well. Again, as I say, could be a cultural thing here. Being, British, we try to avoid any uncomfortable, awkward situations in terms of social settings. But I think, to me, that looks pretty good. So we can jump into the task here. Let's leave the plan on the screen. And let's consider how we would open this letter. So in the previous letter, where we talked about a job offer given on a plane where we met a businessman, we used the last name. I think that was appropriate because of the context. Even though it was semi-formal, we're still applying in a sense for a job. In this case, it would seem, I think, quite strange to write the surname. It's almost too cold, too distant. This is a neighbour, not someone that we don't know. It's probably someone we've seen a fair few times. So let's use the first name. And it's an elderly neighbour. So it might be good if we use a typical elderly, a name that's more typical for an elderly man or woman. So please don't be offended if I'm using a name that you have. It's still a very nice name. Dear Dorothy, let's say. It's typical for older ladies. So let's go with Dear Dorothy. And as I said, I want to just go with a very simple opening sentence, checking up on her. I hope everything is well with you. Remember, we want that question mark at the end there. It's open-ended. It invites a response. It's polite. It's semi-formal. It's neighbourly. So we can just leave that there and then jump into the first main paragraph explaining what will be happening. And when we want to introduce why we're writing, notice a couple of things here. We've talked about them in a few videos already, but there are no contractions. In a semi-formal letter, we should try to avoid contractions, but we do have words like just, so I'm simply writing to let you know. I'm not going to take up too much of your time, so that's what this sort of just communicates. I wouldn't put it in a formal letter, but in a semi-formal letter it works. I am just writing to let you know that I will be hosting. Notice that the grammar that we're using here, this sort of future continuous. I will be hosting a barbecue. I do want you to notice as well the spelling of barbecue. A lot of native speakers will get this wrong. Notice here it's a C, not a Q. So hosting a barbecue. It's an outdoor barbecue, so let's mention that by saying it's in the garden. In the garden. And remember, when there's some shared knowledge, we don't need to use possessive pronouns. We don't need to say in my garden. We can say in the garden, so it's a little bit less formal. So in the garden, next Saturday evening. We're going to start by saying evening. I know we have night here. We do also have evening. But if we say evening to begin with, it sounds like it might not be going on for too long. I know later we're going to say that it might do, but yeah, this is less alarming, let's say. So next Saturday evening to celebrate my graduation. So we've covered all of that really important information. Next Saturday night, graduation party, outdoor barbecue evening. It's about half the elements there. Now we need to talk about the 50 people and the continuing late into the night. So let's go with this. There are currently 50 guests. Okay, so we again notice the paraphrasing we're going for here. We don't have the word guests up in the task. We've chosen to add that here. 50 guests on the invite list. And notice as well with the paraphrasing here, we used invite as a verb. You have invited. Over here, we're using it as part of a compound noun. Invite list. So that's one part of the sentence. That's covering the 50 people. And then let's get on to the continue late into the night. So we had a comma and we'll write, and I expect, so we don't know for sure, that the party will continue until, let's say, around midnight. Because notice here in the task itself, we've got late into the night. Not just into the night, but late. So midnight's quite late. Notice I have this will. You may say, oh, but we have a may up here. You're now saying will. Well, that is tempered by the use of expect. We don't know for sure. So through the expect, we still make sure that we are on track and not saying anything inaccurate. Okay, let's move away from the paragraph there and move into offering some apologies in advance, but I do want to write I apologize. So if I go straight into apologize, that's decent. We can write that. Again, notice that we're changing the word formation from the noun to the verb. If we want to emphasize this, we can add a do. I do apologize. It may seem redundant. It's not just redundant, it actually does emphasize the verb that we're trying to put across. We're trying to be more sincere. I apologize in advance. So that just means before the event, and you've got it up here in the task. I apologize in advance for any inconvenience this might cause you. And to be honest, this sentence here, or this opening to a sentence, this could also be used in a formal letter. Let's say you're writing on behalf of a business and you're trying to apologize to a client or a customer. As a result, this might look a little bit over the top for a semi-formal letter. But I think it's okay. As I say, we're writing to an elderly neighbor, so we don't want to make it too informal. And I think it's okay here, but just recognize that this is a useful bit of language that you can use in formal letters too. So I do apologize in advance for any inconvenience this might cause you. Notice the modal verb there to say it's not definitely going to cause you inconvenience, and I don't want to assume anything, but it might do. And why would it cause her inconvenience? Well, since I know, or because I know that, and here we go, we've got the plan here, peace and quiet, And we can use the nice verb value. You find important this thing. You value your peace and quiet. And the nice thing here is the fact that I've used that possessive pronoun your suggests that I know this elderly neighbour well. We're trying to be considerate of their preferences. We've really taken their own personality and their needs into account. So it makes the apology sound more genuine. So I know that you value your peace and quiet. Let's create a complex sentence here through the use of although. We did it in the last letter. We'll do it again here. It's always very useful. So I want to make the point that we're warning the guests. So we'll say, although it's going to be noisy, this is what I'm going to do. Although the party will be held, notice that future passive, will be held outdoors as per the task here. I will do my best. I will do my best to, and here's a nice expression, keep the noise to a minimum. Keep the noise to a minimum. So trying to make sure that there is as little noise as possible. But this is a nice way of putting it. Keep the noise to a minimum. And yes, we said we're going to warn the guests. So let's do that here. Let's say, and I will make the guests aware. I will make the guests aware that their voices can. Here's a nice verb. If you've watched my Model Answers video course for Task 2 essay writing, you might recognize this verb. It's not used in its typical or most common form, which is when we, of course, talk about maybe carrying a bag somewhere. So that's in the transitive form of the verb. But here, it just means we use it with noise, voices, any kind of sounds. It just means that these sounds can go far. So they can go, it's like the distance that the sound can travel. And you can actually use the verb travel as well to mean the same thing. It just means that we need to be careful to make sure that we keep our voices down because they can be heard from quite far away. So I will make the guests aware that their voices can carry and disturb others nearby. That's the point about the voices carrying. If the voices carry all the way over to neighbours, it's going to disturb them. Okay, let's move into the final paragraph then, and we are looking at inviting Dorothy to the party. Now, if this was a typical informal invitation letter, we've seen this a lot. So invite your friend to come and stay with you. Why don't you come and stay with us? Why don't you think about joining us at the party? Have you thought about coming to stay with us? You know, that sort of invite. If it's a formal invitation, it's going to be you are cordially invited, potentially, or at least you are invited to attend, etc. In this case, as I said, it's a little bit different because we have this idea that maybe the neighbour isn't going to want to be there, and we don't want to put them in an awkward position. So I'm going to use this. You are, of course, it should go without saying, but I'm going to do it anyway. You are, of course, very welcome to join us if you would like. Now, a couple of things happening here. The first is that we have more conditional grammar, which is great for the complexity score in grammatical range and accuracy. And the other thing is that we're not putting too much pressure on the neighbour to come. We're saying join us, but only if you want to. You shouldn't feel compelled. And notice you don't need to write to join. Obviously that is implied because we can see it over here. So that's the first thing, clear invitation. So we're meeting the task requirements. And then, as I said, maybe a very cultural British thing, but we're going to continue not to put too much pressure on the neighbour. So we first of all want to say it would be great to see them. It would be great to see you for the celebrations. So that's the point of the party, celebrating a graduation. We've already mentioned graduation, so we don't need to do it again. And notice the would. It suggests already that we know it's unlikely. They're probably going to say no. If the neighbour did think they want to come, they wouldn't be offended by the use of would. but again, we're just not putting too much pressure on them. It would be great to see you for the celebrations, although I will understand entirely if you would rather stay home that night. Now, there are a number of things happening here. First of all, you should notice again, we have another although, so another complex sentence. And so here we have that unlikely use of would. And down here, you can see I've got the will, which suggests that here we are moving more into the likely scenario. We were expecting to get our invitation turned down politely. I will understand entirely. Notice the would here. Now that would is not conditional, it's just a necessary element of rather. You wouldn't typically say I rather have this than that. You would say I would rather do this than do that. So that's what that is there. So don't get too confused about the will and the would. I will understand entirely if you would rather stay home that night. Okay, so let's move into the next sentence. Do we need another one? I think it would be useful to just close it off with maybe we can always catch up another time. So moving into slightly more informal language, but certainly it's okay even for an elderly neighbour to say catch up. That's perfectly fine. It's something they're going to use as well. Notice the use of always here. It's not necessarily you're not like you say I always go swimming. It's always, there's always going to be another opportunity, so don't feel like this is the last time. So we can always catch up another time. Now we have a word count of 152, so we're already over, but let's just close it off with a polite ending, just to say. And again, you might feel like this is a little bit over formal, so let's reduce that level of formal sounding tone by saying give me a call rather than call me. Just give me a call. It's a bit nicer in the noun form. Give me a call if you would like to talk more about this, rather than if you would like to discuss this further. Discuss this further sounds very formal, sounds very stuffy, business-like. You might, if it was an informal letter, say if you want to chat about this, but in this case I think this strikes the right balance between the two, and we're going to close it off. I think in this you could say best regards. I would find that strange writing that to a neighbour, even if it were an elderly neighbour, so I think best is perfectly fine, but I certainly wouldn't write something like love. And let's go with the name. Again, you could write a long form name like Benjamin, but it's likely that you will, again, it depends where you are in the world and what your understanding of culture is and what the cultural norms are, but it's pretty typical for you to talk about the short form of your name when you introduce yourself to an elderly person, particularly if they go on to be your neighbour and you're going to be interacting with them a lot. So Ben would be perfectly fine there. And so our word count is easily over, but not too far over, so it should be enough time to go back and check the work, which we always want to do. Just a reminder, try and leave yourself with a couple of minutes left at the end to check your work. Otherwise, that should bring us to a close on the semi-formal letters. So here we looked at a final semi-formal letter with a little bit of a mixed purpose, but focusing really on an apology and on an invitation, and then explaining a party, covering all of those task requirements, every single one, even though there were quite a few. I'll leave you now, as always, to do the gap fill exercise, and when you come back, you will be able to start the section on the formal letters. So I'll see you there.